Did you know that one of ancient Rome's most famous religious festivals was actually an elaborate trap that ended in the kidnapping of hundreds of women? In 750 BC, the newly founded city of Rome threw a magnificent celebration that would change the course of its destiny forever. As neighboring tribes gathered to enjoy the spectacle, they had no idea they were walking into history's most shocking mass abduction, one that would transform enemies into family and create an empire that would last for centuries. Today, we're going to talk about the abduction of the Sabine women in Roman history. In the early days of Rome, the city faced a critical problem that threatened its very survival. While Rome had plenty of ambitious men ready to build a great civilization, it severely lacked women, making it impossible for the population to grow and thrive. The situation was so dire that Romulus, Rome's founder, realized his dream of a mighty city would crumble without immediate action. Desperate to solve this crisis, Romulus first tried the diplomatic approach. He sent envoys to neighboring communities like the Sabines, Latins, and Etruscans, proposing marriage alliances between their peoples. These established societies looked down on the Romans, seeing them as little more than a collection of outlaws and adventurers. Every proposal was met with rejection and sometimes outright mockery. The failed negotiations left Rome in an increasingly precarious position. As neighboring cities continued to deny them the chance to form family bonds through marriage, the Romans grew more desperate. Their city, though strong in spirit and ambition, would soon face extinction if they couldn't find a way to ensure its future generations. This desperation led Romulus to devise a plan that would either save his city or destroy it. After months of rejection, Romulus conceived a bold and cunning plan. He announced the celebration of a grand festival in honor of Neptune, cleverly naming it the Consuelia. This wasn't just for any religious celebration. It would feature spectacular horse races, theatrical performances, and feasts unlike anything the region had ever seen. Word of this magnificent festival spread quickly through the surrounding territories, and Romulus made sure to extend special invitations to the nearest Sabine settlements, knowing they were not only the closest neighbors, but also for their beautiful daughters. The promise of entertainment, food, and sacred celebrations proved irresistible, and soon the Sabines agreed to attend, bringing their entire families. As the festival day approached, Rome transformed itself. The city's men worked tirelessly to construct viewing stands for the horse races, set up market stalls, and prepare enormous feast tables. Young Roman men were secretly assigned specific roles and given careful instructions, though none of the preparations hinted at the true purpose behind the celebration. The atmosphere in Rome crackled with nervous energy, as everyone involved knew this festival would change their city forever. The morning of the Consuelia arrived bright and clear. Thousands of visitors poured into Rome, with the Sabines arriving in especially large numbers. Families came dressed in their finest clothes, ready to enjoy what they thought would be a day of peaceful celebration. None of them suspected that beneath the festive atmosphere, every Roman man was waiting for a signal that would turn this religious festival into one of history's most famous events. As the crowds gathered around the horse races, Romulus awaited the perfect moment. When the excitement reached its peak, he stood and gave the predetermined signal, raising his cloak high into the air. In an instant, the festival erupted into chaos. Roman men sprang into action, charging into the crowds with a single purpose: to each capture a Sabine woman. Screams filled the air as hundreds of young women were suddenly torn from their families. Fathers who tried to protect their daughters were pushed aside, while mothers clutched helplessly at their children. The Sabine men, who had come unarmed to a religious festival, found themselves powerless to stop the mass abduction. Young Roman men carried off their chosen brides, while others blocked the pursuing Sabine men. The carefully orchestrated attack happened so quickly that most of the Sabine men and elderly were driven from the city before they could mount any effective resistance. In total, legend says that 683 Sabine women were taken. The Romans immediately barred the city gates, transforming the city into a fortress against the inevitable retaliation. Inside Rome's walls, the captured women were gathered and brought before Romulus himself. He moved among them, promising that they would be honorably married according to the Roman law and become respected citizens of Rome. No woman would be taken as a slave or concubine, he assured them, but would instead be granted all the rights of a Roman wife. Despite these promises, the women's tears and protests echoed throughout the city streets as night fell on what had begun as a festive morning. The Sabine army, led by King Titus Tatius, finally launched their long-awaited assault on Rome. The clash of weapons and war cries echoed across the Seven Hills as fathers and brothers fought to reclaim their stolen daughters and sisters. The Romans, though outnumbered, defended their city with fierce determination, knowing their future hung in the balance. For months, the bitter conflict raged on, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. The fighting reached its climax at the Roman Forum, where the two armies prepared for what promised to be their bloodiest battle yet. But just as the warriors raised their weapons, an extraordinary sight stopped them in their tracks. The Sabine women themselves rushed onto the battlefield, many carrying their Roman-born children. These women, who had now been married to their Roman captors for over a year, positioned themselves between the two armies. Priscilla, wife of Romulus, led them as they pleaded with both sides to end the bloodshed. With tears streaming down their faces, they begged their fathers and brothers not to make them widows and their children fatherless. To their new husbands, they appealed not to make them orphans and their children motherless. In a moment that would change Roman history forever, the fighting men lowered their weapons, moved by the women's courage and wisdom. These same women, who had once been victims of abduction, had transformed into powerful peacemakers, their intervention bringing both sides to negotiate. The Romans and Sabines agreed to unite as one people, with Romulus and Tatius ruling jointly over a stronger combined kingdom. The Sabine women had turned a story of violence into one of reconciliation, proving that sometimes the greatest victories cannot come through force of arms, but through the power of love and family bonds. The union of the Romans and Sabines became one of the most transformative events in Roman history. The once separate peoples merged their customs, traditions, and governing systems, creating a society that was stronger and more dynamic than either had been alone. This new Roman-Sabine kingdom doubled in size and military strength, setting the foundation for what would become one of the world's greatest empires. The Sabine influence on Roman culture ran deep and lasted for centuries. The Romans adopted Sabine religious practices, including the worship of deities like Quirinus. They incorporated Sabine military tactics and weapons into their army and even embraced Sabine fashion and social customs. The Sabine language enriched Latin with new words and expressions that would be used for generations. But most significantly, this event established a precedent for how Rome would handle future conquests. Instead of destroying or subjugating defeated peoples, the Romans learned the value of integration and assimilation. This policy of extending citizenship and privileges to former enemies became a cornerstone of Roman expansion and success. The story of the Sabine women was celebrated in countless works of art, literature, and drama, serving as a powerful symbol of how conflict could be transformed into cooperation. The tale resonated so deeply that Roman families would later pride themselves on claiming mixed Roman-Sabine ancestry. Even in times of civil strife, Romans would invoke this story as an example of how bitter enemies could become the closest of allies. The abduction of the Sabine women, though beginning in violence, ultimately demonstrated that unity and reconciliation could create something far greater than the sum of its parts. The story of the Sabine women teaches us that even the darkest beginnings can lead to unexpected paths of peace and prosperity. What started as a desperate act of kidnapping transformed into a powerful lesson about the strength found in unity and the wisdom of choosing peace over vengeance. From this ancient tale, we see how the courage of women who stood between clashing armies changed the course of history. These events shaped not just Rome's future, but left us timeless lessons about resolving conflicts and building bridges between divided peoples. The Sabine women showed that sometimes the bravest action isn't fighting, but stopping others from fighting. Their choice to see beyond hatred and find common ground became the foundation of Rome's greatest strength, its ability to turn former enemies into fellow citizens. And today, as we face our own divisions and conflicts, this story reminds us that differences can become strengths, enemies can become family, and that the path to peace often requires both wisdom and courage. The legacy of the Sabine women lives on, not just in history books, but in the enduring truth that the greatest victories sometimes cannot come through conquest, but through reconciliation.